Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ma'am, and all my friends. Today, we are Yuria Khasmita and Muthia Hamidah from Group 7. We'll try to explain the topic about interpreter. Okay, next. Our topic today is language interpretation. The different types of interpretation, how to train effectively as an interpreter, and how to become a translator. Okay, now let's come to language interpretation. A language interpretation is the facilitating of oral or sign language communication, either simultaneously or consecutively, of different between users of different languages. The process is described by both the words interpreting and interpretation. In professional parlance, the interpreting denotes the facilitating of communication from one language form into its equivalent or approximate equivalent in another language form, while interpretation denotes the actual product of this work. That is the message that's rendered in the speech, sign language, writing, non-manual signals, or other language form. Interpreting takes place when one person translates orally what he or she hears into another language. Actually, the difference between interpreting and translating is quite simple. Translation is written down, whereas interpreting is spoken. And what is an interpreter? An interpreter is a person who converts a thought or expression in a source language into an expression with a comparable meaning in a target language and a real time. Okay, that is about language interpretation. Next, comparison to translation. Okay. Uh, Interpreting it takes a message from a source language and renders that message into a different target language. For example, English into French or German into English. While translation is transference of meaning from text to text, written or recorded, with the translator having time and access to resources, for example, dictionaries, glossaries, etc., to produce an accurate documents or verbal artifact. So actually, the differences between interpreting and translation is quite simple. A translation is written down, whereas interpreting is spoken. Okay, next we will see the types or the models of interpreting. The models interpreting. Okay. Okay. The first is simultaneous interpreting. What is simultaneous interpreting? In simultaneous interpreting, the listener hears the interpretation at the same time as the speech is made. The interpreter sits in a booth wearing headphones with microphone. There is a booth for each language and two or sometimes three interpreters in each booth. The interpreter hears the speech through the headphones and simultaneously interprets. Okay, so in the simultaneous interpretation, the interpreter renders the message in target language as quickly as he or she can formulate it from the source language. Okay, that is about the simultaneous interpretation. Then consecutive interpretation. What is a consecutive interpretation? In consecutive interpreting, the interpreter listens to a speech while taking notes. When the speaker has finished, the interpreter stands up and delivers the speech in his or her native language. The speech could be as long as 15 minutes nowadays, although in the past 30 minutes was not unusual, not long. The interpretation is not a summary, it is a complete rendition of the original speech in another language. Okay, that is the consecutive interpretation. Okay, consecutive could be useful for a question and answer session in a press conference or an after dinner speech. Okay, the next is whispered interpretation. Visual interpreting is used when one or two people do not understand the source language. A whisper is not a very accurate description because too much whispering is not very good for the vocal cords. Most interpreters listen to the speaker and simultaneously renders the interpretation to the listener or listener, and no equipment is available here. This technique could be used at a school meeting, for example, where one parent doesn't understand the language being used. Okay, acoustic can be a problem in visual interpretation. And relay interpretation. What is relay interpreting is usually used when there are several target languages. A source language interpreter interprets the text to a language common to every interpreter, who then render the message to their respective target languages. For example, a Japanese source message first is rendered into English. Then the another interpreters will render English into their language, such as German, Japan, Arabic, like that. That is a relay interpretation. Then the next is bilateral or liaison interpretation. Sometimes it's referred to the ad hoc interpreting. This interpreting happens when the interpreter uses two languages to interpret for two or more people. This type of interpreting is still used today in informal situations, such as for a business meeting and for community interpreting. Okay, that is about the model simultaneous, consecutive, whispered, relay interpretation, and bilateral interpreting. Okay, next, let's see the types of interpreting. The first is conference. Conference interpreting is interpretation of conference either simultaneously or consecutively. Although the advent of multilingual meetings has consequently reduced to the consecutive interpretation in the last 20 years. The next, judicial. Judicial, legal, or court interpreting occurs in courts of justice, administrative tribunals, and wherever a legal proceeding is held. Legal interpreting can be the consecutive interpretation of witnesses' testimony, for example, or the simultaneous interpretation of entire proceedings by electronic means for one person or all of the people attending. Then escort. In escort interpreting accompanies a person or a delegation on a tour, on a visit, or to a meeting or interview. So the interpreter will interpret what they see or what they meet um, in their activities. And the public sector, also known as a community interpreting, public sector can also call it a community interpretation, is the type of interpreting occurring in fields such as legal, health, and local government, social, housing, environmental health, education, and welfare service. And the last is, and the next, medical. Medical interpreting is a subset of public service interpreting consisting of communication among medical personnel and their patient and his or her family facilitated by interpreter. Okay, that is the types. Next, we'll explain more by Mutia. Okay, Mutia, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Well, my friends, we continue about types of interpretations. First, sign language interpretations. When a hearing person speaks, an interpreter will render the speaker's meaning into a sign language used by the deaf party. So, my friends, sign language is very important and very useful for the deaf participants, where the translator or interpreter will explain from the sign language from the speaker into the sign language. Next, media. It is provided particularly for live television coverage, such as press conference, live or tape interviews with political figures, musicians, and artists. So the interpreter will come to the one room and then they will see the speaker from a monitor. So in that room, the translator or interpreter will translate the target language. And then modalities interpretations. The most common modality through which interpreting service are provided is on-site interpreting. In on-site interpreting, there are more types in the next part. Next, it is about telephone interpretations. Telephone interpreting enables the interpreter to deliver the interpretations via telephone. These types is usually occur or happen in some situations. For example, in the credit cards, after the speaker says, and then the interpreter will say it after the speaker itself. And then the next, video interpretations. Interpretation service via video remote interpreting or VRI or a video relay service or VRS are useful where one of the parties is deaf, hard of hearing or speech impaired or mute. This type is a very common used by some countries such as American, British, and French. So their country have their self-assigned language in the video forms. Next, we continue for how to train effectively as an interpretations. To be interpreter, it is not easy job. So here we can see some points to be effectively as an interpreter. The first, understand that interpreting is all about accuracy. As we know, interpreter should deliver a language into a close meaning. So the hearer will know what is the text about or what is the context about. Next, recognize what is expected of you as interpreter. So here, interpreter is not allowed to make a mistake because when the interpreter make a mistake, so they will arrange the conference. Next, have the right skills. An interpreter should have right skills. There are two skills that interpreter should be master. The first, long-term memory and short-term memory. In short-term memory is useful for the interpreter talking about what is the speaker says previously. And the next, long-term memory. Long-term memory is useful for interpreter when they explains about context, what is the speaker says. Next, be persistent. Be persistent is very important and crucial point for an interpreter because in here, the interpreter should be strong and have power to be the professional interpreter. So the interpreters have learn more and then have a positive mind and then have a high motivations and also have the intelligence. Next, train well. Train well is very important for interpreter. So the interpreter should learn more, such as watching movie or read news and then see about the novel and the others for giving more information for interpreter. Next, interpreter should be look for the following in a good training programs. Here, there are some points. These are interpretation should always be in a target language. Interpretation should through target language helps in better understanding. Interpretations in a target language helps trainees to understand difficult words, context, and cultures. And then certain professional subjects require in-depth knowledge. Next, it is the last part, how to become a translator or interpreter. The first, become fluent in another language. Of course, an interpreter, to be a good interpreter, we have to fluent in another language. Lucky for you if you grew up in a bilingual family, but if you are not, so we can learn more through schooling from junior high school, senior high school, after university. until university. And after you gaining the bachelor degree, so you can be a professional interpreter. Not only this, you can also join a community where the foreigner come to this community. So you can practice it more with the native speaker. Next, get specialized training. Get specialized training is a special path if you want to build your career as interpreter. American associations or American translator associations give a chance and give some opportunity for you or for students if you want to be interpreter. So you can choose one of them to build your career as interpreter. Next, become certified. Certifications is not a required if you want to be translator or interpreter, but it is very useful when you are certified, and then you can use the certifications in your resume, and then it will give you more point when you want to find a job as interpreter. Next, class about target specific industry and learn the terminology. When you have choose your target specific industry, you can learn more about the terminology in this field. For example, you're interested in political case, so you can learn more about the terminology in this political case, and then you can interpret what is the figure or the people, the public figure, when they talk about the political field. Well, my friends, I think that's all from me. Thank you so much for um, listen to my explanations, and I give to Ma'am Yuria.
Okay, I think that is our group's explanation about the interpreter. Okay, thank you very much for your attention and see you then. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.